Greetings everyone, Ambassador Kosh coming at you with a brand new video today, and this will be a work video. But this will not be your normal normal video from your favorite Vorlon. Because there's a phrase, a very old phrase, never incur the wrath of a Vorlon. Well, Mr. JJ Abrams, you have incurred the wrath of the Vorlon Empire and of Ambassador Kosh. And today we are going to present a case against one Mr. JJ Abrams for the crimes that he has committed against the Fandom Menace, against Star Wars and Star Trek fans alike, and against the movie-going public in general. Because, Mr. Abrams, you have erred. And you have erred grievously. I will present the facts of the case against Mr. Abrams, and it will be you, the jury's responsibility to mete out the appropriate justice for appropriate punishment for Mr. Abrams. So, with that being said, let us begin. In 2009, Mr. Abrams, you were commissioned to do a reboot of the Star Trek franchise. And you did so. You released a reboot of the original series Star Trek movies featuring Kirk, Bones, McCoy, Uhura, and the rest. And your movie was relatively well received. It was original to an extent. It was innovative to an extent. It did not break the laws of the pre-established Star Trek universe to an extent. It was relatively well acted, relatively well written. And most everyone enjoyed your film. However, due to the financial and positive reception of Star Trek 09, you were once again commissioned to do a follow-up, a sequel to Star Trek 09. This, Mr. Abrams, is where you erred. This was your first offense. Because Star Trek Into Darkness is not a wholly original idea. In 1982, a Mr. Nicholas Meyer, Harve Bennett, and a number of others at Paramount Films were brought in to create a sequel to the Star Trek the Motion Picture. This movie, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, was a follow-up to a classic original series Star Trek episode, Space Seed, that featured a rather indomitable and actually a very memorable villain in one Khan Noonien Singh. In Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, we have one Mr. Ricardo Montalban reprise his role as Khan Noonien Singh, as well as the original cast being brought in or returning to reprise their roles as Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and the remainder of the original series cast. This movie was very well received. It was very profitable. It has become an icon of cinema, and in particular of the science fiction genre. It is regarded as one of the best, if not the best, Star Trek movies ever made, if not one of the best movies in general ever made. It had emotional weight, it had stakes, it had a riveting conflict and a riveting story. And you, Mr. Abrams, ripped this movie off. You took the main antagonist, Khan Noonien Singh, and recast him by one Mr. Benedict Cumberbatch. You changed his backstory to an extent. You changed his motivations. But you kept many plot points from Star Trek II Wrath of Khan and implanted them in your movie, Star Trek Into Darkness. And this is your first crime. You ripped off a previous property, ideas and plot points from said property, characters, and so on. And this is one of the first charges levied against you. Because Star Trek II Wrath of Khan stands unto itself as a great piece of science fiction, a great piece of cinema. Your movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, is a copycat of that iconic film. But this would not be the first nor the last time that you would commit this offense. In 2014, you were commissioned by one Miss Kathleen Kennedy to do the first installment of a brand new Star Wars trilogy. And there was much hype behind this movie because at that time, Lucasfilm and the Star Wars property had been purchased by Disney. And you initially did not want to do this project because you did not feel like you had the necessary ability to do the story. However, after some coercion and some persistence on the part of Miss Kathleen Kennedy and others, you relented and you took on this new Star Wars project. In the intervening months and years leading up to the release of your Star Wars film, Star Wars The Force Awakens, a lot of hype and a lot of bluster was given for this movie. It looked promising on the surface because you said we were going back to basics with Star Wars. There wasn't going to be so much reliance on computer-generated imaging. It could be a lot more practical effects. The public was enthused. The Star Wars fan base was enthused. They were excited. And then the movie is released. And then the truth starts to leak out. He's done it again. He's taken the plot of a previous movie, changed it around a bit, and repackaged it and repurposed it for his own ends. You took the plot and some of the major plot points of Star Wars A New Hope. You changed the gender of the protagonist. You brought back some of the classic characters. You tried to build similar relationships that were done previously in Star Wars A New Hope, in particular the relationship between Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in this instance, you had it be the young Rey and Han Solo. You had this young woman living on a desert planet. Again, much like Luke Skywalker. In the instance of Star Trek Into Darkness, and we will parallel here, you had the conflict be the chase of this idea: should the United Federation of Planets be a militaristic organization or an organization dedicated to exploration? This is not much different than what happened in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where the dilemma of whether or not humanity had advanced far enough to begin to create technology to create life. Now, these two ideas might seem disconnected, but in fact they are rather connected because these are ideological ideas. But you use the same plot points from Star Trek II Wrath of Khan in your own film. You had that iconic moment between Spock and Kirk where Spock saves the Enterprise by sacrificing his own life. But in this case, in your movie, you had Kirk be the one to sacrifice his life, seemingly, to save the Enterprise. You had similar shots. The iconic scene where Spock and Kirk are separated by a transparent door in Star Trek II. Except you flipped it. The people called you out for this. You denied it. But in this case, with Star Wars, you did not have the writing capability to do an original story. Instead, you copy and pasted. You took bits and pieces from Star Wars A New Hope, which is quite frankly, a superior movie, and put them in your own movie. Because one, you didn't want to take risks, be it because of on your own volition or because of studio mandate. Or two, you simply do not have the directing and writing capability to do an original story on your own. And now, we come to the third and final charge. You were brought back in to conclude what is now known as the Disney trilogy. And its final installment, The Rise of Skywalker. And from what has been leaked and what has been rumored, you have copy and pasted once again major story elements or characters from a superior movie, i.e., Return of the Jedi. You have brought back a villain, one Emperor Sheev Palpatine, because you did not believe, or the studio that is backing your movie did not believe that a pre-existing villain, one Kylo Ren, had the necessary weight to carry the movie as the main antagonist on his own. In doing so, you have rendered the story arc of the first 6 Star Wars movies moot. And this is a grievous charge, Mr. Abrams. A grievous charge. Because you have, in essence, broken canon. You've broken Star Wars canon. The 6 episodes of the original Star Wars saga is the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker, and also the rise and fall of the Intergalactic Republic and its successor, the First Galactic Empire. From what has been rumored, you have brought back Palpatine in a nonsensical and erroneous set of circumstances. Now, granted, these are all rumors, nothing can be proven at this time. But we reserve the right to levy further future charges towards you once this final Star Wars movie is released to the general public. If the rumors are to be true, you have created and crafted a nonsensical story in The Rise of Skywalker that involves searching for what is known as a MacGuffin. which seems to be a common thread, but we'll come to that momentarily. The Rise of Skywalker is nothing more, or appears to be nothing more, than a copy and pasted version of Return of the Jedi with slightly different elements in it. There have been numerous reports, Mr. Abrams, that you have been doing reshoots up until just a few weeks ago for this movie, because it has been in public screenings or private screenings, and the private screenings have performed so poorly that by studio mandate, you have been ordered by Kathleen Kennedy, and I imagine others, to go back, reshoot elements of the story to make it a more satisfying film. This is not filmmaking, Mr. Abrams. This is hackery. Because that is what you are, is a hack. You did not want to do this movie because a superior filmmaker refused the job. One Mr. Colin Trevorrow. Mr. Trevorrow wanted to and was brought in by Lucasfilm to do this final movie. But because of the actions of one Mr. Rian Johnson and his mishandling of the middle film in this Disney trilogy, one The Last Jedi, Colin Trevorrow, most likely of his own volition, turned down the project. Now, there are stories that he was fired, but I don't know how true that may be. He may have on general principle, because he had his own story that he wanted to tell, the one that would have been cohesive within the universe that you, Mr. Abrams, set up. But you were convinced by Kathleen Kennedy and most likely others to return to do this final installment of the Disney trilogy. And you did so. But you have done so incompetently. Because if the rumors are true and the publicity that has come out for this movie is to be believed, this movie is a train wreck. It's a mishmash of poorly conceived ideas and last-minute editing and last-minute reshoots. This is not filmmaking, Mr. Abrams. This is a disgrace. You have tainted the legacy of one Mr. George Lucas through your actions or inactions of doing this final installment of the Disney trilogy. You have turned off the fan base, along with your co-director, Mr. Rian Johnson, and his poor attempt at writing and directing a Star Wars movie. And now you have been brought back in to pick up the pieces. Is this not true, Mr. Abrams? And don't wait for the telegrapher, or don't wait for the translation. It cannot be denied. There was no plan for this trilogy because you yourself have very limited vision when it comes to being a writer or a director. We have proof of this in the case of Star Trek Into Darkness and Star Wars The Force Awakens. You copied and pasted superior work throughout your career, or at least in the last several years, to build a name for yourself and build a reputation. And it's a poor, poor reputation, Mr. Abrams. The Rise of Skywalker is a monstrosity, from if the reports are to be believed. The plot is nonsensical. The inclusion of Emperor Palpatine, who had a satisfying conclusion to his story arc from episode 1 through episode 6. Because if logic is to be employed here, a person being thrown into the equivalent of a nuclear reactor and that reactor exploding a few minutes later, no person could survive that, real or fictitious. And yet, you have cobbled together some explanation for how he survived that ordeal in Return of the Jedi. And why? Because one of the actions of Mr. Rian Johnson in killing the main antagonist for this Disney trilogy and one Supreme Leader Snoke, and two, because of your own poor attempt to create a compelling and interesting villain in one Kylo Ren. Now, the blame should not be fully on you because Mr. Rian Johnson has his own part in this tale to play. But if you had spent any amount of time to write Kylo Ren as a complex and interesting character and give good reasoning for his motivation, then the public would have received him and accepted him enthusiastically. But because Rian Johnson was given freedom to do whatever he wished rather than following the notes or outline that you had created, you now have to, instead of relying on Kylo Ren as the main antagonist of this final installment of the Disney trilogy, you resurrect. You pull a rabbit out of your hat with no explanation or logic. You resurrect an endearing and respected villain in Emperor Palpatine. One that has weight. You negate not only the storyline of Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader, but you also negate the storyline of Sheev Palpatine. Because many regard Emperor Palpatine, or Senator Palpatine, or Supreme Chancellor Palpatine as one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy. And now, because you don't have the directing or writing capability to make Kylo Ren a fierce and fearful protagonist and antagonist and a villain, you have to undo the final installment of the Star Wars saga and resurrect Sheev Palpatine. If the stories are to be believed, the main plot thread of this final installment of the Disney trilogy is essentially a MacGuffin chase, or a MacGuffin hunt. And this is not a first for you, is it, Mr. Abrams? Because the MacGuffin has been a plot device you have employed throughout your career. And I am not saying that others have not done things similarly. They have. But this is your fallback position. You've done this repeatedly throughout your career, be it in TV or in your TV or film careers. You did it in Alias. You did it to an extent in Lost. You did it again in Star Trek Into Darkness and Star Trek 09. But you also did it in The Force Awakens. And now, if the rumors are to be believed, you're essentially copying yourself. Because the main plot thread of Star Wars The Force Awakens Was this map to the location of Luke Skywalker, who has disappeared from the galaxy? For whatever reason people may want to believe. And once again, you're doing the same thing in The Rise of Skywalker. The main characters, the main hero, the main protagonists of this story have to search for a MacGuffin to locate Emperor Palpatine. Mr. Abrams, this is not compelling storytelling. This is lazy. And I hope that the jury will rule against you appropriately. So to sum this up, Mr. Abrams, the charges against you are as follows. You're a lazy story writer. You are a near incompetent director. You have no creativity, no originality to speak of. You use the same tropes and plot points and plot devices throughout your career, with honestly mixed results. You, sir, are a disgrace to the film industry. As to your involvement in two very well regarded and well received franchises, them being Star Trek and Star Wars, you are a disgrace. And you should hang your head in shame. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I hope that I have presented adequate evidence to Mr. Abrams' crimes and his lack of film making creativity and ability. And now I leave it to you all. Deliberate and come back with a ruling against Mr. Abrams. Should he be released from all charges, acquitted from all charges, or should he be punished? Well, guys, I know that was a slightly different video than what I've done before, but for those that follow me on Twitter, this was my case against Mr. JJ Abrams. I hope I presented the facts of what he has done and what has been rumored to be going on behind the scenes with The Rise of Skywalker. I will at some point do a proper review video on Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, because it is quite honestly a iconic film of the 1980s. I've already done a video on Return of the Jedi, or anything in a manner of speaking. So, as always, if you enjoyed this video, if you are new to my channel, welcome. These are not, this particular video is not the norm for me, but I wanted to try something a little different. And I hope it was enjoyable. I hope it made sense. And I hope the facts I presented as well made sense. You can find me on Twitter at Rogue5778. If you like this video, by all means, like, share, subscribe, and comment. And until next time, this is Ambassador Kosh, signing off.